The blacksmith didn't hear the scream, but he heard the splash. Metal paused mid-hammer. The river behind his forge hadn't spoken in years. Drought made it sluggish, muddy, mean. But this splash was sharp, sudden, alive. He put down the tongs, walked. Not fast, not slow, just certain. She was face down in the shallows, black hair fanned out like spilled ink, wrists tied behind her back with wet rope. Her dress was torn calico, dyed darker by mud and blood. He rolled her over, lips blue, chest still. He didn't speak, just pressed 2 fists beneath her ribs and jerked up. Again. Again. A cough. A gasp. The river coughed back a child. He carried her like he'd carried hot iron, arms steady, careful not to drop her weight too fast or tilt her too much to one side. Set her down on the forge's work table. Wrapped her in an old tarp. Waited. By noon, she breathed steady. By dusk, her eyes opened. She didn't speak, just stared at the ceiling beam, blinking slow like she was counting scars in the wood. The town had already started whispering by the time he walked down for water. That's the Indian girl from the mission, the one that burned. Elias found her, didn't he? Quiet old Elias, that forge breeds trouble. Maybe she brought something with her. Maybe she ain't supposed to be back. He returned without answering a word. The girl was gone from the table, but not far. She sat beside the dying forge, legs pulled tight to her chest, watching the coals like they were whispering secrets. He didn't say anything, just tossed in a log. Flames stirred. She flinched, but didn't move away. By morning, she hadn't left, just sat. Ate the bread he left without looking at him, drank from the tin cup he knocked twice against the anvil so she'd hear it ready. They never exchanged names. Didn't need to. There were no words between hammers. He handed her a brush. Pointed at the coal pile. She hesitated, then stood and swept. Awkward at first, then smoother, like she remembered how to work. Or had always known. She didn't ask to stay. He didn't ask her to leave. Next week a sheriff's deputy came by. Lean man with a church pin on his lapel. Said the mayor heard. Elias was harboring a problem. Elias kept his eyes on the horseshoe he was shaping. The deputy shifted his weight. Said, "Girl like that. Folks got reason to worry. That mission burned for a reason." Elias quenched the shoe. Set it aside. Didn't say a word. The deputy didn't come back. The girl watched the exchange from behind the woodpile. When the man left, she walked into the forge, picked up the hammer he wasn't using, and mimicked his swing. Her wrist wobbled. Missed the mark. But she kept at it. By nightfall, her palm was blistered. She didn't flinch when he handed her a leather wrap. That night, she drew in ash on the workbench. A house, flames, stick figures inside. One had a cross above it. He stared. She stared back. He didn't touch the drawing, didn't ask what it meant. Just sat down and polished a blade for too long. On Sunday, the church bell rang loud, always did. The preacher's voice floated over the town like smoke. Fire and damnation and forgiveness braided into every sentence. The girl stayed inside, picked up the broken hinge from a busted cabinet, tried to fix it with too much pressure. It snapped. She stared at the pieces in her hand like they'd betrayed her. He showed her how to temper the metal. Heat, oil, hammer, let it cool. She copied his movements until the hinge held again. In the corner of the forge sat a rusted switch. Bent, discarded. She picked it up once, curious. He snatched it from her without thinking, tossed it in the scrap bin. She didn't touch it again. But later that week, he found her drawing it in the ash. Perfectly. From memory. The mayor came. Down fat hands folded over his belly, trying to look friendly. Offered Elias money for relocation. Said it'd be better if the girl was sent east. A school could take her. Safer that way. For everyone. Elias nodded once, walked back into the forge, and shut the door behind him. The mayor stood outside for another minute before waddling off, muttering. That night someone lit a cross in Elias's yard. Fire climbed up the wood like it knew exactly what it was doing. The girl didn't scream, just watched from the porch. When the last ember died, she took a piece of the charred wood, crushed it in her palm, and smeared it on the forge floor. A circle. And inside it, 7 small marks. 7. He didn't ask, just hammered harder the next day. She made her first full blade a week later. Crooked, heavy, but hers. He didn't correct her, just handed her a whetstone and nodded once. She sharpened it until her fingers bled. That night, she left it on his bedside table. Next to it, she'd etched something into the wood using the blade's point. A name, a child's name. He didn't sleep. By the end of the month, she was working beside him without instruction, watching the color of the steel, listening to the hiss of the oil, her hands steady, her eyes hollow. Elias caught her one evening staring at the wall behind the anvil. He'd once scratched tally marks there, a habit from younger days, one for every job, every tool, every blade. She stood there, a long time, then added her own. Not a tally, a symbol, the burned school, but smaller now, a child-sized etching tucked beneath the rest. He didn't stop her. That Sunday, she followed him outside. They stood by the river, the same river that tried to swallow her. She stared at the water, then dipped her hands in. Not fast, not to wash, just enough to feel the current. Then she whispered something he didn't catch. He looked at her. She looked back, and then, for the first time, she spoke. One word. Again. Didn't ask what she meant, he just nodded, and lit the forge. The girl never asked to hold the hammer, but her eyes asked plenty. Each morning she swept the coal dust from under the forge, dumped the ash, chopped wood. He never told her to. She just did it. And when she finished, she stood behind him, watching, every swing of the mallet like it was a language. On the 10th day, he handed her a piece of flat iron, no bigger than her hand, and pointed to the small anvil. No words. She nodded once. Her grip was wrong. The hammer too heavy. She struck it crooked, twice, then caught the rhythm. Her knuckles turned red. She didn't stop. The heat made her dizzy, but she stayed. At sunset, her wrist gave out. She dropped the hammer, silent. He gave her water. She drank it with shaking hands. The next morning, she came back with her wrist wrapped in old cloth, ready. Elias said nothing, just added another coal to the fire. That week, she learned the feel of heat, how to smell when the iron was ready, how to let the hiss of oil guide her hand. Her face stayed blank, but her hands grew steady. She started carving lines into the scraps, symbols, not letters, circles with slashes, half moons, 7 dots, sometimes 8. He watched without asking. When the preacher's voice echoed from town on Sundays, she worked harder, every swing louder. Sweat fell from her brow like it was penance. She didn't flinch at the bell. She didn't flinch at the preacher's voice. But she did pause once when he said the word, cleansing. That night, Elias pulled out an old book, Latin, prayers from another life, and placed it near the fire. She didn't touch it, just stared until the pages curled and turned black. He let them burn. Later, she took a coal and smeared it over her palm, then pressed her hand to the wall. A print. Small. Perfect. Next to it, she drew another, smaller still. A child's, he didn't ask whose. The next day, they worked in silence again, but something had changed. She was more precise. her lines sharper. She carved a bird from scrap, wings wide, head turned. It had no eyes. The mayor returned, hat in hand, sweat beading at his collar. This time he brought paper. "Elias," he began, voice syrupy, "we're just trying to keep the peace. That girl, well, folks are uneasy. Some of them still remember what happened at the school." Elias didn't stop hammering. The mayor continued. "She draws things, says nothing. That spooks people. And now there's talk of statues. We don't need no ghosts rising in bronze, understand?" Elias quenched the blade he was working on, wiped his hands, took the paper, didn't open it, tossed it into the forge, watched it curl. The mayor left with lips tight and fists tighter. That night, the girl shaped something from leftover steel, thin, delicate, not a weapon, a flower. She set it on Elias's pillow. He found it before bed, ran his thumb over each petal. Sharp edges but careful hands. In the forge's corner sat a bellows with initials carved in the wood, faded, JLE. She stared at it one evening, then looked at Elias. He nodded once. She picked it up, pumped it until the coals glowed white. That week, Elias built her a smaller set of tools, better for her grip. Didn't say why. Just left them beside the forge one morning. She arrived, saw them, picked up the smallest hammer. Didn't smile, didn't speak, just went to work. By midweek, her arms ached, her palms raw. She didn't rest. The preacher came by the forge, uninvited, greeted Elias with forced warmth, then turned to the girl. "Child," he said, voice sugar-slick, and trembling beneath, "the Lord forgives, even when his children stray. You've been through fire. It's time to walk clean." She didn't look up, just turned the metal in the flame. He stepped closer. "You remember what happened at the mission, don't you? You remember why it burned?" The tongs in her hand trembled, then steadied. Elias moved between them, not aggressive, not violent, just present. The preacher nodded, lips pursed. "Careful what you forge, Elias. The town remembers." When he left, she broke the iron she was shaping, slammed it against the anvil until it snapped. Didn't weep, didn't breathe hard, just turned away. Elias set down his tools, picked up a bundle wrapped in cloth, unrolled it. Inside, an old train lock, rusted, heavy, the kind used on rail cars. She stared. He didn't explain, just set it on the bench and began cleaning it. After a long moment, she sat beside him, picked up the brush, helped. Later she placed her palm over the lock and whispered something. Just one syllable. He didn't ask what it meant. That night, they worked late. Sparks lit the forge like fireflies. She shaped a plate of steel into a small square, then etched a name into it. One of the 7 from before. Then another. She worked, in a rhythm like she was counting heartbeats. Elias built a frame, wooden and wide. She bolted the names to it, 1 row, then 2. Her hand never shook. By dawn, they had 20. The town's men gathered the next day for a meeting at the chapel. Elias didn't go. The girl didn't stop working. She was reforging something long, broad, almost like a blade, but not quite. He watched her from behind the grindstone. She was shaping something new now, something she didn't want to use, something meant to be seen, not held. That night, Elias heard a sound he hadn't heard in years. A child's voice, hers, humming, quiet, off-key, barely there. He didn't interrupt. She stopped when she saw him, looked down, then up. Her eyes didn't hold fear anymore. Just wait. The next morning, the preacher's words echoed again from town, louder this time. "Wolves among us, heathens at the gates, remember the fire, remember who lit it." Elias threw more coal on the forge. She didn't flinch. She poured water over her blade. It hissed, but it didn't scream. The sound of grinding never stopped now. Morning to midnight, the rasp of metal against stone filled the forge like breathing. She worked in silence, arms lean from days at the anvil, eyes sharper than the blades she shaped. The blacksmith watched, without speaking, handing her tools as needed. When she forgot to eat, he pushed bread toward her. When she didn't sleep, he let her be. She'd begun to stack plates of steel in neat rows. Each one bore a name, carved slow and deliberate with a chisel. Some names were Apache, some English. Some were just initials. 27 so far. She knew each one by heart. Elias hadn't asked why. He didn't have to. One night, when the forge had cooled and her hands were black with soot, she placed the first 3 plates into his lap. He looked down. The third name was Isaac. He'd seen that name once before, on a crate bound for a school he helped supply. Iron locks. No questions asked. She waited. He held the plates for a long time, then stood, walked into the back room. When he returned, he carried a rusted railroad switch, one he'd kept out of guilt. She took it from him, held it like something holy, then laid it on the forge table, placed a nameplate on top, and lit the fire. They melted it down together. The preacher's voice grew louder that week, sermons harsher. He no longer spoke of redemption, only purity, cleansing, legacy. Some in the town whispered about building a new bell for the chapel, a symbol of rebirth, a fresh start. Others talked about the girl, how she'd grown too comfortable, too quiet. One woman called her a ghost that hadn't finished its haunting. Another said it wasn't natural, the way she worked iron without flinching. Someone else muttered that Elias had gone mad, letting a heathen girl reshape his tools, his forge, his life. Elias didn't defend himself, just pounded steel harder. Late one night, the girl shaped something new, not a blade, not a hinge, a curve, then another. Slowly it took form, a child's figure, knees drawn to chest, hands to face, fire licking at its legs, no features, just shape. She didn't show Elias, hid it under a canvas in the far corner. But he knew. The following morning, Elias walked to the cemetery on the edge of town. He hadn't been there in years. At a broken stone marked only with the letter M, he knelt, not to pray, just to sit. When he came back, his hands shook for the first time in weeks. The girl was waiting. She'd drawn a new name. This one was longer, more careful. Her own. He read it, then turned away. That evening the preacher arrived again, this time with 2 other men. One held a paper with the town seal. Elias didn't take it, just stared at them. The preacher's eyes settled on the girl behind him. You're harboring a spirit of rebellion, Elias. This child, she brings division, darkness. It's not too late to repent. Cast her out, cleanse the forge. Elias said nothing. The second man stepped forward. You remember the fire, don't you? That school, she survived. But others didn't. Some say she started it. Elias looked at the girl. She met his eyes, didn't blink. He turned back. And if she did? The men exchanged glances. She needs to be removed, the preacher said. This town has a future. That future doesn't include ghosts. They left a letter on the workbench, a formal request to have her placed in a state-run home 3 towns over. For her good, it said. She didn't touch the letter, just threw more coal into the fire. The sculpture under the canvas grew each day. She forged small hands, a face without eyes, flames that curled around its feet. Once, Elias caught her standing in front of it long after the fire had died. One hand stretched out like she was offering it warmth. He said her name aloud that night, the name on the newest plate. She didn't respond, but she paused. Is it yours? He asked. She looked away. then nodded. He sat beside her, pulled an old notebook from the shelf. Inside were diagrams, train parts, switch locks, shipping manifests. He flipped through until he found one marked Spring 63. Circled was a delivery to Holy Mercy Mission School. 8 crates, iron locks, hinges, bars. He traced a line under the word bars. "I built them," he said. She didn't speak. I didn't ask what they were for. Paid in coin, not questions. She reached over, tore the page from the book, folded it, placed it in the fire, watched it burn. He didn't stop her. That night she carved the final nameplate, not with a chisel, but with the tip of a blade. Deep, rough, like a wound. She attached it to the base of her sculpture. The bell for the new church arrived the next day. A tall cart pulled it through the town square. Polished bronze, pure, untouched. The preacher called it the voice of redemption. The townspeople gathered to admire it, to speak of second chances and forgetting the past. Behind the smiles was unease. They had seen the smoke from Elias's forge, heard the constant ring of metal against metal, and some had heard rumors that the girl was shaping something more than tools. That evening, a child wandered into the blacksmith's yard, found the sculpture, lifted the canvas, then screamed. The next morning no one spoke to Elias. No one looked the girl in the eye. But the preacher delivered a sermon titled, "What the Lord Casts Out." His voice rang louder than ever. Almost desperate, Elias sharpened his old chisel, cleaned the ash from the corner, bolted the final row of nameplates to the iron frame. When she placed the sculpture beside it, he saw it fully for the first time. It was not a child burning, it was memory, and it would not be silenced. The morning the bell was meant to ring, the sky held no clouds, only the stillness of heat and dust. Elias stood by the forge, arms folded, watching the smoke trail rise like a ribbon from the chimney. The girl was already gone. She'd left. Before sunrise, dragging something heavy wrapped in burlap behind her, wheels carved deep into the sand. He hadn't stopped her. He hadn't needed to. The town square bustled with nervous hands and bright lies. Men straightened coats they never wore, wives clutched children dressed too clean for the weather. The new church bell stood at the center, polished to blind under the sun. Its metal gleamed. No soot, no story, just shine. The preacher paced nearby, reciting the words he would soon shout from the pulpit. Redemption, renewal, holy sound. She arrived alone. The sound of her cart scraping against stone silenced conversations. People turned, first out of curiosity, then unease. The burlap was stained dark at the bottom from where the iron dragged. She stopped 10 feet from the bell and faced them still. Dust clung to her arms, her jaw, her lashes. But her eyes were clear. Elias arrived last. Not with her, not behind her, just near enough to be seen. He leaned against the water trough, arms crossed, watching. The preacher stepped forward. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked on the first word. He cleared his throat. Today, we raise the Lord's voice above our own. Let this bell mark a new chapter, free of division, guilt, and pain. The girl didn't flinch. She reached down, untied the rope, and pulled the burlap back. The town went quiet. It was a sculpture, forged from dark iron and scorched steel. A child crouched in fear, hands shielding a face with no features. Fire rose around its legs, frozen mid-lick in twisted orange metal. Behind it, a wall of names, rows and rows of etched plates, each letter deep enough to survive time. Some were clearly children, some marked only with initials, all impossible to forget now. No one moved. The preacher tried to laugh. This is a mockery, an unholy distortion. She turned to him, said nothing. He faltered. We are here to honor forgiveness, to build forward. This This keeps us shackled." Still, she said nothing. The mayor took a step toward her. "Girl, we understand you're hurting, but this town—" She lifted her hand, not high, not dramatic, just enough to make them stop. She walked past the bell, reached her sculpture, and opened the back of the frame. Inside, a chain held a single clapper of raw steel. She reached for it slowly and let it fall. It struck the sculpture once. The sound wasn't beautiful. It didn't echo like bronze or carry like church bells. It groaned, a sound pulled from the throat of memory. Jagged, heavy. It clung to the air like smoke. Elias closed his eyes. The preacher stepped back. The townspeople stared. Some blinked fast, like trying not to cry. Some didn't bother trying. One old woman walked forward slowly, placed a trembling hand on the sculpture, whispered a name. The girl didn't speak, but she nodded. The preacher turned to Elias. "This is your doing." Elias didn't answer. The preacher's voice rose. "You let her shame this town." Elias stepped forward, calm as a man walking toward his own fire. "You shamed yourselves," he said. Gasps followed his voice. It had been months since anyone had heard him speak. He pointed at the sculpture. "You buried what burned. She forged what remains." The mayor reached for the bell rope. "Ring it," he said to the preacher. "Drown this." The preacher gripped the rope, pulled. Nothing. He pulled again. Still nothing. The bell wouldn't ring. The girl had welded the clapper shut with a single clean bead of steel. The preacher turned red, tried to shout, but no words came. The silence roared. Then footsteps. First one, then two. A mother guided her son toward the sculpture. He touched one of the name plates, whispered, "Is that her?" The girl knelt beside him, pointed to one plate. He traced it with his finger. Someone else came forward. Then another. Within minutes, the sculpture was surrounded. Not in protest, in reverence. The preacher walked away. So did the mayor. The bell stood untouched. Later, when the square emptied, the girl stood beside Elias. He looked down. "You done?" She nodded. He picked up a small horseshoe from his satchel, one he'd made years ago and never used. He handed it to her. She didn't smile, but her fingers closed around it like it mattered. They walked together to the edge of town. She stopped at the tree line, looked back once. He didn't ask where she was going. She didn't offer, but before she disappeared into the brush, she turned and asked, "Do you think they'll forget again?" He stared at the bell. "No," he said. "Not while it stays quiet." She left. Elias walked back to the forge and stoked the fire, because the dead had spoken, and the living, for once, had listened.